Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar tonight on the sudden death of a child and regaining balance in your life. My name is Pedersen. I'm the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends. My co-host tonight from the Open to Hope Foundation is Dr. Heidi Horsley, and we're both going to host the interview tonight. We have a terrific guest.
And today we're also going to talk about what Dr. Raisman has found in his book about how can you find hope, how can you stand on one foot, and how can you regain balance in your life after a child or a sibling has died.
So Neal's story, first of all, he's a PhD. He's written other books, but he's kind of one of the top experts in his regular life until grief found him. But he was an expert, I guess one of the top on retention in higher education, on being able to help students stay in school.
We're so happy to have you here.
Why don't you, tell us a little bit about Isaac? And he was 26 and he died. But will you talk a little bit about Isaac and that experience of your loss and how you got to, where you realized you had to find a new normal? Catch us up to there.
Isaac was a young man in the prime of his life. He had just met a young lady with whom he was getting very serious, and it looked like they were going to get married. He was living in the Upper East Side of New York in Manhattan in his own apartment, working in the Empire State Building, and he was a leader in his profession and doing extremely well. We had no inkling whatsoever that anything was wrong with him, of course. And what happened was I was away at a conference, or going to a conference, and Eileen, my wife, couldn't get in touch with him. She called him and she called him and she called him, and he didn't pick up the phone. I thought at the time that he had the flu and he had shut off his phone so he wouldn't be bothered. In any case, I canceled going to the conference and drove back from Poughkeepsie in New York, which is about an hour and a half away from the city, New York City. I went to his apartment, had real trouble getting in. I talk about that in the book and how that built up the anxiety. Finally got into his apartment and were able to locate the superintendent. And I walked in, and as I walked through the apartment, this aura developed around the apartment, and I couldn't understand it. It looked in the mirror as if the whole apartment was covered with glass, and I don't know how to explain that other than the description. I finally walked into his bedroom, and I didn't see him. I thought, well, maybe he was feeling better and he went out to get something to eat. And then I walked around to the side of the bed, and I found him lying there dead. He had obviously been dead for a few hours, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, period. I just had no idea. How do you respond to this? All I could think of is, how am I going to tell his mother?
You were normal, but this is a new normal. And what do you mean by that? What's your definition of that, Neal?
Well, what I mean by that is that the situation you are involved in is an abnormal situation. Mm-hmm. And everything that happens in there is abnormal, but the truth of the matter is you are still normal. You have not become abnormal yourself. It's a new normal. You're living in a whole new world. You're living in a whole new experience in which you have got to confront death, and the death of a child. So although you feel as if you're not normal anymore, it's not you, it's the situation.
I have something here, Dr. Neal, for you. It's a question from says, it has been a year and a half since I lost my son. I can't find or understand a new normal.
It is very difficult to understand the new normal, particularly when you are just a year and a half out. The whole world has been turned upside down. Everything has changed. The new normal is that you are now a grievant, and you are grieving. You can't understand it. You're in it. You only can understand it a long time later when you are able to look back and realize that it wasn't you that was abnormal. It was a situation. It's a new normal. It's a new life. It's a new you, but you are still you.
You know, when you're a year and a half into grief, it's hard to hear that you're so new, but you really are. And as we look back, we can think to ourselves, the new normal at a year and a half may be that there is no normal, that it's chaotic, that one day you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm making a slight bit of progress. And then the next day you're like, oh, I just backslid 4 more steps. That at that time in grief might be what the new normal is. But when you're in the grief, you wouldn't identify it as that, because you wouldn't say, gosh, this is how I want my life to always be. Grief is normal. It's how we should feel.
The reason I named the book Standing on One Foot, it goes to this whole thing of normal and the new normal. For me, when Isaac died, it was as if a leg were cut off and I lost my balance for a very long time.
I like that.
It is simply not easy to balance on one foot. You may have seconds of steadiness and control, but then imperceptibly, something happens to disrupt your equilibrium. You begin to fall and have to put the other foot down, but try to imagine what it's like not to have the other foot. You can't put it down and you fall. And falling and losing your balance is part of the normal situation. That's what life is like after one loses a child. It's an eternity of trying to balance again on one foot. And sometimes it can be maintained a while, but inevitably balance is lost and you fall down. I've been in grief now for actually 11 years last week. And I still find myself falling down. I'll see a book, I'll reach for a book in the bookstore and think, Isaac will love this. And then all of a sudden I realize I can't give it to him. I can't give it to him.
And now, it sounds like, Dr. Neal, you're not falling down as much as you were initially. Is that what I'm hearing too?
I'm not falling down as much as I did initially. In the beginning, I fell down constantly. I fell into a deep grief. And when you're in grief, you can't balance very much at all. I couldn't go to work for weeks. I was just so devastated. I hurt physically, and I couldn't understand it. It felt like, people will say it feels like you get a punch in the solar plexus. Well, the truth of the matter is you do. There's something called cortisol, but it's a physical release of this thing called cortisol. And what it does is it creates this feeling of being punched in the gut. It creates you feeling as if you can't control things. It makes you stress. Cortisol is released when you are under stress, and there is no greater stress than grief and depression. And both of them can hurt physically. And people need to realize that. There's nothing wrong with them if they have this pain. I had chest pain constantly. I couldn't understand it. And then I learned about cortisol. It helped me understand it. I wasn't the one who was wrong. It was cortisol causing me to feel this pain. And that's something we don't talk about very often. We talk about psychic pain, but not the actual physical pain that you can actually feel. And it debilitates. It causes you not to be able to do things. Cortisol is really a horrible thing. It's normal in stress and in anger, but in grief it gets doubled.
And you said your memory will also disappear? Is that you have lapses of memory?
Oh God! Well, this was interesting. I found a great deal of relief by going to Compassionate Friends. And we had a social get-together one time, and a group of us were just sitting around talking. And one of us mentioned, I can't remember a damn thing anymore. And someone said, I can't either. Then we all started saying, our memory is shot. I can't remember. When I go upstairs, I can't remember why I went upstairs. And the reality is that your ability to remember, your ability to function gets impeded, again, by this cortisol. It interferes with your ability to remember things. So your memory does get shot, and people don't talk about this. I don't know
if any. This makes sense, Dr. Neal, because when my brother died, I was in college, and I had to drop out because I couldn't focus and concentrate, and I was like, I can't do this. I need to drop out of school for a couple of years.
Not only does your memory disappear, but your ability to concentrate is disabled quite a bit. So when people go back to work, they start talking about how they just can't do it. I could not go back to work. And when I went back to work, I really couldn't focus on it. And I got to the point where I really didn't care about it. It became meaningless to me. In the larger scope of things, the job, I was a college president at the time, just didn't hold any value for me. And a lot of people talk about the fact that these things don't hold value anymore.
Any suggestions for dealing with parental guilt when dealing with the sudden death of an adult child as a result of a drug addiction? The parents did not know the child had the problem. Thank you, Sandra. And I want to weigh in here and say that I think that most people after the death of a child have guilt. What would you say? Even if it's not rational, what would you say, Dr. Neal?
Everybody has guilt. It doesn't matter why your child died. Isaac died of meningitis. He woke up in the morning with a bad headache, and by 4:18 that afternoon, he was dead. Eileen constantly felt that it was her fault. She should have been able to do something. She should have been able to step in and save him. That's what parents do. But the reality is that we're parents. We're not superhuman. There are some things that are beyond our ability to control. And the idea of guilt is something that comes with death. It's something that comes with a child's death, because as a parent, our basic belief is that we should be able to protect our children. That's our primary job. But we can't. Often we can't. But you're going to feel guilty. That's all there is to it. You're going to feel guilt. The best way to get rid of it is to express it, to talk with people about it. Some people go to a counselor. Other people are able to do it with their family or with their spouse. We found that we could do it through compassionate friends. And other people talked about guilt.
I couldn't agree with you more in having, literally met tens of thousands of grieving parents. Very rarely would I meet an individual where guilt and regret weren't part of the scenario. It doesn't matter, like Heidi said, how rational it is, whether, we bought the car for them or gave them the keys or picked the doctor or chose the type of treatment or, should have seen something in their life. That guilt comes along with it. But I agree with you that what we do with that guilt and regret is that we share it. We first acknowledge that we feel it. You can't let go of what you won't feel, but it's a big part of the journey. You write down here that others may have trouble relating to us. I'd say most of us can relate to that. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, others may have trouble relating to you because they have not gone through the experience. And many people have this reaction to you as if death is catchy, like a cold. And they don't know what to say to you, and they don't want to get too close to you because they don't want to get drawn into your grief. That's wrong, but that's how they react. They can't relate to you. That often includes your family. Many people have told me about times when they have gone to their parents and tried to get understanding, and it didn't happen. In fact, the comment after 1 year, for some reason 1 year seems to be a time period that people use. One woman said to me the other day that she was talking with her mother, and her mother said, "It's been a year. Isn't it time to snap out of it?"
Wow.
Well, the reality is that you can't snap out of it. It's like when your leg is not ripped off, it's not going to grow back. It takes a great deal of time to find that balance. It can also include your wife or your husband. It is not abnormal for one or the other to react differently to the grief. Men often have trouble relating to the wife because they express grief quite often differently. We men, unfortunately, have this machismo concept that we're supposed to show that we're strong and in control. when inside we're being ripped apart. And I can remember early on, Eileen would start talking about how she felt guilty, and it used to get me upset. And she'd blame herself, and it used to get me upset. And I had trouble talking with her about this or relating to it, because I would say to her, it's not your fault, it's meningitis. And
Right.
what I didn't realize was that we were expressing our griefs differently. And husbands and wives sometimes lose the ability to talk and listen to one another. What I didn't understand was what Eileen wanted was for me to listen, to allow her to talk it out. And men are not very good listeners, unfortunately, sometimes. So it can and will intrude into your relationship with your husband or your wife, at least for a while in the beginning, and it can continue on. This is one of the great stress times, and this is the time when you find out whether or not you have a real relationship that can withstand this kind of stress, unfortunately. It also can include your priest, your pastor, your minister, your rabbi, or your imam. What we found was when we went to our rabbi to talk about the grief that we were feeling and that we were going to Compassionate Friends, what we got were his comments that were just not getting anywhere. He gave
well,
us
and Dr. Neal, I remember reading in your book, you said that someone had said to you, you know, he's in a better place, and your thought was,
right.
well, he's in a great place when he's by my side. I mean, he was in a great place here.
Yeah. When people said to me, he's in a better place or he's in heaven, I kept thinking I'm in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because heaven was having him alive on the earth with me. I don't know if there's an afterlife at all. To be very honest with you, I lost most all of my religiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I had trouble relating to the idea that a kind and passionate God could take my son.
Right.
Other people find great relief in their religion, and that's wonderful, and I envy them. But what we found was our rabbi just came through with platitudes.
Yeah.
The same thing he would say to anybody.
You know, we do workshops, and I've done many around the country for chaplains and ministers especially, and rabbis and priests. And, you know, when you get them behind closed doors, I think as a society, that's why groups like the Compassionate Friends are so important, that we think that they have a lot of depth and education around grief and around different types of loss and how to handle and help those in grief. But what you find is they really don't get a lot of education in that area. And like you say, there are many families that I meet. You know, I meet people who do lose faith going through this process, but I also meet many who find faith. But it certainly can affect your faith, and I think that a lot of ministers and people in that profession, they need to be educated because to learn how to walk with families, because a lot of families do get hurt and leave their church or their synagogue and never come back.
I actually have another question for both of you. It says, I lost my only child when he was 18 to suicide a little over a year ago. One of my biggest fears is that I'm going to forget him and forget what it was like to be a mom. Do you still remember Isaac vividly? Can you still feel what it was like to be his dad?
Wow, great question.
Yeah, I know, right?
Great question. And
powerful.
Yes, I do. Isaac is present in my life all the time. I have not forgotten him. There are days when I don't have my first thought being Isaac is dead, but now Eileen and I can remember Isaac and all the wonderful things that he did and all the things that made us laugh. He is not gone. He is part of our life, and you will not forget your child at all. That just is not going to happen. No matter how the child dies, it doesn't matter. Your love will keep him in your heart and will keep him in your mind, and you will find that your love for him will stay the same and might even grow. because absence does make the heart grow fonder, unfortunately. It was wonderful when I could pick up the phone and just call him and see what was going on. Now I can't do that, but Lord knows he will never leave my life.
Mhm.
I couldn't say it any better than that, Heidi, and I know you feel the same way, but it is the great fear. I think it's the number one fear that we have, is that we're going to forget their, their scent or what their voice sounded like. But I know at 15 years, Ashley's with me. I agree with Neal. Ashley's with me every day, and a part of everything I do. And I'm sure you feel the same way, Heidi. Scott.
Absolutely, I absolutely do. And I mean, I've been, my brother's been dead for 33 years, believe it or not. And the thing I want to say is, early on, I think my grief got in the way of some of my best memories. And as time has gone on, there's memories that I didn't even realize I had, that I access all the time. And they're there, and you will remember. You're not going to forget. And right now, if you've forgotten, it's because your body's protecting itself. Sometimes we don't want to be overwhelmed with those feelings. And so over time, sometimes some of the memories will come back as you start to heal. I have another question that just came in. It says, how do you survive, and what do you do to rebuild?
Oh, how do I survive? Well, that's an interesting question. The way I survive is recognizing that this is my new normal, and this is my life, and it can be good. Now, I've had years of time to find a little bit of balance. The other way you create the new normal is, as I will talk about in a later slide, is you talk about your child. You talk about your grief. You talk about your anger and rage, which is another thing that you will have. You let it out. You don't keep it in. The more you keep it in, the less you're able to make progress towards finding a new balance in life. The whole thing is recognizing that this is a whole new world, but your life continues on. I have actually found, and this is going to sound strange, some joy in life now. I can enjoy my grandchildren. I write about that in the book. I can enjoy my daughter, and it just moves on. Now, the next slide, by the way, is something I think is kind of important. Life becomes like the movie Groundhog Day. In a movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray woke up each day and he repeated the same day each day, but it was a little bit different. And the first few weeks and months were like the movie Groundhog Day to me. I began the day the same way, waking up, feeling a free-floating anger, seeing his body on the floor, and shuddering in the reality of his death. I would struggle to push myself out of bed. I didn't want to get up. The bed and sleep were the only place and time when I could momentarily forget reality. Sleep really became a blessing for me, a time when the horror of the day did not repeat itself endlessly like a looped bit of video. Finally, each day I'd shove myself up, I'd get dressed, try to remember to shower. Cleanliness seemed such a small issue the first days against the enormity of what had happened. Then I'd go downstairs and drink out of a mug that he had given me years and years ago. Eat a little something, take my medicine, which seemed foolish because I wasn't fully sure I wanted to keep on going. In fact, it seemed the only way to stop the same day every day was to end them all. I'd push myself through the day, the first weeks just sitting on the couch trying to get some energy to do something, not going to work. It seemed so pointless. And the day would slip by with people coming over to pay their condolences, going through the same charade each time. Yes, thanks for asking if I'm doing okay, when I wasn't. And they should have known that and not even asked. I consider that to be a really dumb question. Of course I wasn't all right. My son had just died. I mean, how the heck do you think I really am? And then finally going back to work, pushing through the day with the image of my dead son ever present in my mind. And when people ask me, how you doing, everybody would ask me, how you doing? I'd want to say, my son just died, I'm doing horribly, and if you bring it all back again, I'm going to get really, really angry. But then I would say, okay, considering that my leg was cut off, and I can't stand the remaining one all that well. make it through the day, going home, going back to bed, week after week, people dropping away, staying away for fear they get sucked into my grief, watching TV but not seeing it or hearing it, going to bed finally for some peace, falling asleep, waking up in the free-floating anger, waking and having to face another day, seeing his body on the floor, same thing day after day. It was life like Groundhog Day, like the movie. It just became repetitive. Everything that I felt one day, I felt the next day. Until one day, I woke up without the first thought in my mind being, my son is dead. And then I knew I started turning a corner.
Mm-hmm. That's big.
And that one day is different, you know, for all of us.
If you don't get angry, I'm surprised. I got so angry that I challenged God to a fist fight.
Wow.
And I was upset because he wouldn't take my challenge. I was constantly angry. It seemed so unfair. It seemed so wrong to take for my son to be gone. I couldn't do anything but be angry. And it stayed with me for a long time until I again woke up that day, and the first thought wasn't that my son was dead, and I stopped being a little bit angrier, a little bit as angry. But it's normal to be angry. You've just lost one of the most important parts of your life. It's not fair.
Exactly.
It's not right. So
I have a question for you about another feeling also, and I'm not going to read the whole question that someone wrote, but I'll get to the gist of it. She's experiencing panic attacks for the first time in her life. And I know that that's a very normal feeling, having anxiety and panic. And was that something that either one of you experienced?
Yeah, I experienced it. Eileen experienced it. What happens is it's the same thing as the anger. It's like this cosmic injustice. And you start realizing that you have no control over the world. You have no control over your own life in many ways. And you get nervous. My daughter has minor anxiety attacks because she's so afraid that her son, who was named after Isaac, as you do in the Jewish religion, might die, just like Isaac died. Anxiety.
And I think that's a really normal thing that people don't talk about. I'm a bereaved sibling also, and my son is 18, but last year when he turned 17, I've always worried that he's going to die, in a car accident. But last year when he turned 17, I was so overcome with anxiety for the entire year because I thought that 17 and boys is not a good thing for me because my cousin and brother died at 17. So I was overcome with the same anxiety that you're talking about. So it's interesting how these kind of things manifest.
Talk your heart out. I believe talking and sharing is one of the most healing things we do. Can you talk about that for a minute, Neal?
Yeah. It is important to express how you're feeling. It is important to listen to yourself as you talk about it. You can't just talk about it as if it were something off the top of your head. You've got to go deep within you and let it out. When we started going to Compassionate Friends, we found a place where we could just open up and say what we wanted to say and cry if we felt like crying. You've got to release the pressure on your psychic heart, because if you don't, it's going to start building and building and building. I know of one woman very well who didn't talk her heart out, and she thought she had control of it all. She thought she was on top of it all. And then one day, 6 years later, she broke into a total depression and a total breakdown because she had been building it up so long that it just took control of her. You've got to just talk your heart out. If someone asks how you feel, tell them. Don't be afraid of their feelings. If you hurt their feelings, they're not your friends. If they ask you how you're doing, tell them. I mean, I would tell people, I'm not doing well today. I'm having a very bad day. If you ask the question, how many children do you have, which is a very common question, I always say 2, Isaac and my daughter Shayna. Only Isaac has died and passed away, but he's still with us. I'm not ashamed of the fact that he died. I am proud of the fact that he lived. So when people ask that question, how many children do you have, most people panic because then they're afraid of hurting somebody else's feelings or making them feel a little bit awkward. Well, you know what? It is better for them to feel upset than for you to feel upset.
Another thing I agree with so much is write your heart out. Why is it important, do you feel, for people to write?
Oh, because there are so many things that you can't say to others, that you don't want to say to others. In the book, for example, I have one section where I talk about when I thought about suicide, when I thought about just driving into the left lane of traffic and ending it all. That was something that most people have some sort of thoughts about suicide at some point, and they keep it in. But I found out that when I started writing a journal and kept every thought that I had and wrote it down and let it out without worrying about it, with total honesty, without worrying if I looked bad as a result of this thought, I was able to start releasing some of the pressure that was building up in me and start to balance more in life. So I really believe in keeping a journal. You don't have to write a book, but write the story of your learning to regain balance. Take a diary. Keep it out, and don't be afraid to write something. It's for you. It's for you.
And Dr. Neal, the research shows that writing is a really great way to helping yourself and to healing, and especially if you're stuck in that trauma, because we all have that trauma narrative about how it happened and what happened, and it's a kind of a way to release it out of your head.
In the book, for example, I go back to the whole day when I found Isaac. I went through step by step by step.
You did. You took me through that step, Dr. Neal. I was like at the edge of my seat. I felt like I was there because you did a brilliant job of taking people through that.
Good, but it helped me more than to be able to say that, because I had to relive it and face it. I couldn't erase it, and I had to deal with reality in life. So I left nothing out.
Well, the book is Standing on One Foot, and it's available at standingonOneFoot.com. You've got your website, and you've got promo code TCF on here. And so people can get the book there.
The reality is that people listening today and members of the Compassionate Friends, I've got 450 copies of the book that I'm giving away for free. And including the postage. I just want to get it out to people. What I've heard from people who have read it is that it has helped them deal with their own journey, their own problems. And in fact, one young woman mentioned that she read the book and she stopped self-medicating because she understood herself better. So I want to try to help people. So if you go to standingonOneFoot.com and go to buy the book, put in the promo code TCF, I will send you a free copy of the book. I've got 450 of them for free. I had people who have come forward to support me in this project, and we're going to give it away. It's it's a memoir that takes a reader fully into the loss of a child and how it devastates a parent.
And Neal, I would say, not only is it about your story of how you got balance again, but I identified as a bereaved sibling with a lot of the things you were saying, and I was like, wow, I experienced the same feelings and the same thoughts, and that was very affirming to me, and that helped me a lot. So I would highly recommend for all those listening, please get Neal's book.
Thank you for being a guest on the show. We are out of time today, but I want to remind folks, I want to thank our guest again, Dr. Neal Raisman. Dr. Heidi Horsley, opentohope.com. Our wonderful producer, Heather Horsley, who puts it all together. Alan Pedersen on behalf of the Compassionate Friends at thecompassionatefriends.org. We appreciate you all listening tonight, and we look forward to bringing you more webinars and more really good grief information. And Heidi, do you want to say goodnight? Neal was a great guest. That's some great information.
Neal, thank you so much for all your books, and Alan, thank you for all you do for the Compassionate Friends. And I just want to say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. Thank you, and good night.
Good night, everybody.